students, I'm Shreya. I teach English Literature at Global Teachers Academy. We train students to clear the UGC NET examination, right? So, like promised, this is we've been coming out with important questions, and this is the 7th set in that series. So, this set also covers all important portions of the paper that could be expected for you to answer in the examination, and some of these, or most of these rather, are from previous years. So, it's also important for you when you look at the previous year questions to know the kind of authors that are being featured in the options. So, there is the one right answer, which is fine, but you also need to see what are the other authors that are mentioned. Okay, so again, this one again, like I always say, is from all portions from the syllabus. So British literature, world literature, right, literary criticism and theory, ELT, as well as rhetorics, right? So covering all major 5 portions of the syllabus. Moving on and seeing the first question now. So the first question says, it's a quote. It says, only the film which fluttered on the grate still flutters there the sole unique thing. The above lines are quoted from. Is it from Tintern Abbey Revisited? Is it from Michael? Is it from Frost at Midnight? Or is it from This Lime Tree Bower My Prison? Right? So first things first, who has written these poems? What age are these poems from? So all these poems are from the Romantic era, right? These two are by Wordsworth, William Wordsworth, whereas these two are by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, right? This is when he was, Wordsworth is revisiting his place. Wordsworth is revisiting the place where he's had his childhood, he spent his childhood, and while looking at the nature, he's reflecting back upon his lifetimes, or the wonderful childhood times that he spent in the area, right? Michael again is it's a ballad. So again, a question that could come, which of these is a ballad? So Michael is a ballad where he's talking about pastoral life, right? And through the story of a shepherd. Frost at Midnight is by S.T. Coleridge, and in this poem, Coleridge is addressing his son. The son's name is Hartley. Another important question. So a lot of questions that would come from this side, right? Romantic poems. The name of the poems who's written these poems. So Michael is by Wordsworth, Tintern Abbey Revisited is by Wordsworth. Another important question is the complete name of Tintern Abbey. So lines written down, etc. It's a huge name, you must know the name. Frost at Midnight, written by S.T. Coleridge. It was addressed to his son. It was addressed to his son Hartley, and he wanted his child to grow in nature. He says that he's not had the childhood experiences should always be in countryside, right? So he's a huge supporter of life in countryside. Like, he hates the city, and this is a general notion of all romantic poets only, because this is an era where industrialization is slowly and gradually building up. So the town as they understood it, the city as they understood, is losing its charm. It's becoming more brick. It's becoming more cemented, right? It's not as beautiful as it used to be, versus the countryside, which still retains its original beauty. So the idea of growing up in countryside is also growing in nature and around nature, which in turn helps you reflect back and understand your life better. So Coleridge here in the poem also discusses that he's also not had a very fruitful childhood, because it was also not in countryside. And so he hopes for his son Hartley to be a child of nature and be raised in the countryside only, right? So again, 1798 poem. Why I'm telling you so much about this poem is because the lines are quoted from this one only. So the line is from Frost at Midnight. And the last one, the lime tree bower my prison. So this here in this poem, he's talking about how he's been instructed to stay beneath a lime tree while all his friends have gone to explore the countryside, right? This is another poem by S.T. Coleridge. Frost at Midnight is the poem from which these lines come from, right? Moving on then. Modernism has been described as being concerned with this disenchantment of our culture with culture itself. Who is the critic? Is it Stephen Spender? Is it Malcolm Bradbury? Is it Lionel Trilling? Or is it Joseph Frank? Right? So who's the critic who's described modernism as just disenchantment of our culture with culture itself? Right? So there is the disenchantment, there is the distancing. right? What does this line mean in the first place? There is this distancing. You do not put culture at the center like you used to. So the cultural symbols that were forever placed at the center have been replaced now. Because what is modernism? Modernism is the understanding that the things that you were believing in were in fact a facade, right? That is what modernism is about. And postmodernism tends to celebrate this facade, right? Postmodernism tends to celebrate the idea that okay, if there is no meaning, okay, if there is no grand narrative, I will constantly create my own narratives. But what is modernism about? Modernism is about a nostalgia of not having a grand narrative, right? So it is like a disenchantment of our culture. Everything that we believe to be important, everything that we believe to be at the center in the society has been disenchanted. With what? With another minor narratives, okay? So the critic here is Lionel Trilling, right? He's given this statement, but it's important for you to understand what this means, because this is an important insight as to what modernism itself is actually about, right? Here, for modernism and understanding of postmodernism, Lyotard's essay, answering the question, what is postmodern, is important, right? Because he's also talking about the difference between modern and postmodern. And whenever I ask this in a class of students, they always tell me that modern is nostalgia and postmodern is celebration, without understanding what these two words entail, right? So you need to understand why is modernism a nostalgia, and how are you leading to a stage of celebration, which Lyotard tries to answer in his essay also. Here, it's Lionel Trilling who's given this statement, right? And this was in an essay which is called On the Teaching of Modern Literature. On the Teaching of Modern Literature. It's a good essay. You must read this if you have time, right? So moving on. Where I lacked the political purpose, I wrote lifeless books. Very, very important statement by this individual. And before, I don't want to give you the answer before reading the options, but very important statement, an important text in which this statement is coming from, right? So it says, to which of the following authors can we attribute the above admission? Is it Graham Greene? Is it George Orwell? Is it Charles Morgan? Or is it Evelyn Waugh, right? So these are your A, B, C and D options, right? Now, if you just know the kind of books that all of these people have written, you know that George Orwell's books are laden with political allegory, right? There are a lot of political symbols. So your text here, your text Animal Farm is talking about the Stalin government to an extent. It's talking about how socialism can go wrong, right? How revolt can go wrong, where there is, if it's replaced by a leader who's again following a kind of government that keeps people in check and hold, right? And then there is the very famous 1984, right, where he talks of the Big Brother, which is an idea that extreme surveillance can lead to a lack of freedom, right? So both these texts, very important and very laden with political allegory. Animal Farm, where Napoleon is supposed to represent the figure of Stalin, right? So very laden with political allegory. So it's pretty clear, I made it pretty clear that it's George Orwell who's made this statement. And here it's also important for you where this is said and what is the entire context, right? So he wrote an essay which is called Why I Write, right? It's an important essay. He's written this essay in 1946, right? The essay, obviously, like the title suggests, it deals with his journey as to how he's become a writer, right? And he, in the text only, lists 4 great motives for writing. So he says there are 4 great motives for which I write, right? Why I write. I write for 4 great motives. I'm going to write the 4 motives down so that you can take this down if you want to. So he says it's sheer egoism. The first motive is sheer egoism, right? The second, he says, is aesthetic enthusiasm. Right? The third one, he says, is historic impulse. And the fourth one, he says, is political purpose. and then elaborating upon political purpose and how political purpose is an important attribute or an important reason or motive for him to write, he goes on to say, it is invariably where I lacked a political purpose, I wrote lifeless books. Moving on from that, which is the quote already mentioned, and was betrayed into purple passages, sentences without meaning, decorative adjectives, and humbug generally, right? And so purple passages, that's a phrase that comes after it, is a phrase that's used by George Orwell. Could also be a question. I think it's already featured in one of the exams, so remember that as well. Right? So then moving on, next question. The next question that we'll discuss, how does Lord Jim end? Right? So Lord Jim, text by Joseph Conrad, 1900 text. Remember the date, it's easy. Right? So how does Lord Jim end? Does it end A, Jim is shot through the chest by Doramin? Does it end B, Jim kills himself with a last unflinching glance? C, Jim answers the call of exalted egoism and betrays Jewel? Or D, Jim surrenders himself to Doramin? Right? Important text by Joseph Conrad, popular for Heart of Darkness. Right? Important text again, need to go through the summary. Lord Jim and the Heart of Darkness are the two texts that you must look in detail for Conrad. Right? So a little bit about the story here. Towards the end of the novel, it's Jim arrives at Doramin's place, right? And he tells the old man that he is unarmed and he's very sorry, right? But then Doramin doesn't listen to him and he shoots him through the heart, right? So because the questions have been of such nature that they ask you minute details, like I remember for Ibsen's dollhouse, they asked what were in her pockets, right? So because they ask you detailed questions, so a question could also be that it was actually Jim was shot through the heart, right? So the answer here is A. Moving on to the next question. Question says, in Pinter's birthday party, Stanley is given a birthday present. What is it? Is it A, a toy, B, a piano, C, a drum, D, a violin? So like I was discussing, what is in the pocket, it's a similar question, but however, because the text is Harold Pinter's birthday party, the symbol of the birthday present is important in the text, and you must read the summary of the text. So this text is important and the symbol in the text of the birthday present is important, right? So the birthday present is a drum, and I'll tell you why is it important. A little bit about the text first. Birthday party, Harold Pinter, right? Absurd theatre, very important person associated with absurd theatre along with Beckett, right? Because the plays tend to get haywire, you don't tend to exactly follow the sequence of events, and that's the beauty, right? This is the beauty of existentialism. You don't really understand the sequence of events, and then yet it makes meaning. The kind of meaning that you want it to make for yourself, right? So there is no one meaning, but it's the kind of meaning that you want the text to make for yourself. So birthday party text, right? So the present is brought by Lulu, is a character again, and is presented to Stanley. To Stanley through Meg, right? So Meg presents it, Lulu gets it. What is the present? The present is a drum, right? And as soon as Stanley gets the gift, Stanley unwraps it and starts playing the drum. But it is through constantly playing the drum that Stanley almost starts banging it harder and harder and harder. And it becomes like he's possessed. But you don't understand why, right? So that's the symbol of the drum in the text, and it's an important symbol. The answer here is the drum. Moving on. The narrator of Piers Plowman falls asleep on A, is it the Mendip Hills? B, is it the Purbeck Hills? C, is it the Malvern Hills? Or D, is it the Cheviot Hills, right? So again, Pious Plowman, it's an allegory that is laden with a lot of theological references, right? Whose text? William Langland's text, right? Laden with a lot of theological allegory. Right? It's an allegory. So, where does the narrator fall asleep? The question asks you that. So the narrator falls asleep on the Malvern Hills. It's his journey towards the truth, the ultimate truth, right? And this is the the first hurdle. There are a lot of hurdles that you will see in the text. So I'll suggest you to go through a summary. And I remember doing it through a chart that was available online. So try and find that chart where it's almost like this place is known for this. So this is here he slept. Here he is here he is crossing the river, etc., etc. Because there have been questions like this, right? And the later part of the narrative talks of narrator's search for do well, do bet, do best. Yeah? So do well, do better, do best, right? So search for ultimate truth. So Malvern Hills is the place where the narrator sleeps. Moving on. Next question. Robert Buchanan, a minor poet, critic and novelist, took sides in the literary squabbles of 1860s against Swinburne and the Rossettis. He wrote a review which introduced the term. Is it A, the earthly school of poetry? Is it B, the fleshly school of poetry? Is it C, the stealthy school of poetry? Or is it D, the esoteric school of poetry? Right? So this is your question. Now, Rossetti, Daniel Gabriel Rossetti and Swinburne. So these people started the pre-Raphaelite group. Right? Where they were questioning all the existing norms of art and they were trying to go back into the original form of art, did not trivialize any object, focused on all objects as equal. So they were not only painting the great objects, it started with art, it started with visual arts and went on to poetry, right? So did not focus on any great matter, or for instance the topic did not have to be, the subject did not have to be very grand. Even in the trivial, they focused even on the trivial and believed that the trivial also is beautiful, right? So this is the pre-Raphaelite group. That was, we've done a question on pre-Raphaelites. There is usually a question on pre-Raphaelites, right? So these are the pre-Raphaelite group. Now Buchanan has he's critiqued these, right? So he's critiqued them in an essay called they're called the fleshly school of poetry, right? Because the focus, he says, is too much on the body. The focus is, he says, is too much on like sensuality and extreme sensuality, the kind that doesn't focus on the greater learnings of life and only focuses on the exquisite sexuality, right? So he says that, and the essay appeared in a review called the Contemporary Review. It's a journal where the essay appeared. It's called the Fleshly School of Poetry, which is the name of the essay, and it appeared in the Contemporary Review, where he's critiqued the pre-Raphaelite poets as someone who focused too much on sensuality, someone who focused too much on the body, rather than paying focus to the higher pleasures of life, to higher pleasures of mind. Instead, the focus is on bodily pleasures, right? Now, both Rossetti and Swinburne replied. So Rossetti replied through by writing an essay which is called the Stealthy School of Poetry, right? So this was his response to Buchanan's Fleshly School of Poetry, right? Important question, right? Now then, Swinburne also replied, and he replied in a pamphlet which is known as Under the Microscope. Right? It's a rich question. Rich question. Why? Who are the people who are being critiqued? What group do they belong to? Right? They belong to the pre-Raphaelite group. What are the features of features that the pre-Raphaelite group represent? Right? Then the critique. What was the name of the critique? What was the criticism saying? Right? What was the response? So what was the response of Rossetti? What was the response of Swinburne? Right? So all these questions are important. Your answer here is the Fleshly School of Poetry. Moving on to the next question. An extremely simplified form of language used as contact language among speakers of different languages is A. Is it a dialect? Is it B. a creole? Is it C. a pidgin? Or is it D. a register? Right? So 4 types and 4 different aspects of languages are given. Important for you, creole and pidgin have constantly been asked in the exam. Again, important for you is to know what dialect and register also are. Right? So pidgin is the basic mode of communication. The most basic. Right? So for instance, I'll give you an example. If you're a trader who lives in, say, UP, right? And you're traveling to Kerala you're a trader and you're traveling to Kerala for work. But you've no idea about the language, right? And both the people the ones that you're trading with do not have a common language in which they can talk, right? So both of you, because you have to constantly trade, will reach a language or a point in language where you start to understand some of their words and they start to understand some of your words, right? So pidgin is a basic mode of communication, right? It's a contact language of speakers among different language where for easing communication, for communicating things, you've created a basic mode so that you can understand each other's things, right? Now, creole is generally a transition. It's a transition from pidgin to a full-fledged language, right? So it's a transition from pidgin. And how do you know when a pidgin becomes a creole? So when a creole is being picked up by a generation as their first language. So when children are born and they take this language, the language that they've picked up as their first language, it becomes a creole, right? So it's a transition of pidgin to creole, right? So pidgin is a mode of communication, right? Whereas creole is language becoming the I, right? Then language becomes you. Till pidgin, it's a basic mode of communication. But as you move from pidgin to creole, the language becomes the I. The language becomes a part of your identity. Okay? So the answer here obviously is pidgin because it's a simplified form of language and used by speakers for contact. It's a contact language. Then again, you must know what dialect and register are. There is a distinction that is often made. So dialect is when your language changes according to specific regions or specific social conditions. But whereas register is when your language is associated with situations. Right? So your language when changes according to the kind of audience that you are addressing. When it changes to that, then it's a register. Dialect is when it's constantly changing due to social environment and the social structure or the society or the region that you're present in, right? So your answer here is pidgin, but pidgin, the difference between pidgin and creole is important, and the difference between the register and dialect is important, right? Moving on to the next question. Why can't we be friends now? It's what I want, it's what you want, but the horses didn't want it, they severed apart, the earth didn't want it. At the end of A Passage to India, Foster suggests that A. If Fielding and Aziz want, they can be friends. B. Probably if the Indians and the English want, they can still be friends. C. Through Fielding and Aziz want, though Fielding and Aziz want, the horses and the earth of India do not want the English and the Indians to be friends, not yet. D. The east is east and the west is west and the twain shall never meet, right? Important text, very important text in fact. Passage to India, 1924 by E.M. Foster, right? So what does the story generally about? So the story revolves around 2 characters. Dr. Aziz is friends with Fielding and there are 2 females that come from England to India. Now Adela, while they are visiting Barabar caves, which is Malabar caves, which is from Barabar caves in Bihar, which we've already done in a question. When they are visiting the caves, Adela feels that it's probably, she feels something in the cave and she probably feels that it is Dr. Aziz who's responsible, right? And then she tells people that it was Dr. Aziz, and Dr. Aziz is held for a trial for the assault, right? And so there is a kind of, and he's not done it, right? So there is a kind of a distance that develops between Dr. Aziz and all the friends that he's made who are English, right? Because then he's able to clearly see that Indians for English will always remain criminals, right? And then the distance develops. So, and it's a popular last line, right? It's a popular last line that comes here. He says that And Dr. Aziz is not convicted of the crime, right? So he's not the one who's convicted of the crime. And Adela also later realizes that it was not the person who'd done something to her in the cave, who sort of assaulted her, was not Dr. Aziz, right? So he's not, but there is the realization that there is still time for the Indian and English to be friends, and that's what the essay says. That's what the lines say. Why can't we be friends now? It's what I want. It's what you want. So one individual or the other individual could want it, but the situation that when in a cave a female feels assaulted, it's going to be a British female feels assaulted. It's going to be an Indian who's done it, right? So the answer here is C. That though Fielding and Aziz want, the horses and the earth of India do not want the English and the Indians to be friends, not yet, right? So like I say always, we are going to post more videos. If you like the video, if you think that it was useful, follow the channel, right? Subscribe to it so that you can see more videos like that, which we are going to regularly post. Thank you.